Hey everyone, welcome back to the Sports Psych Show. Thanks so much for joining me. Now today, I'm honoured to be speaking with rugby coach Stuart Lancaster. Stuart, welcome to the Sports Psych Show.
Thank you, thanks for the invite, nice to be here.
Well, I'm super excited to have you on the Sports Psych Show. And, look, I know just about everybody will know who you are, but for those of you who've lived under a rock over the last 10 years, I've asked Stuart to introduce himself. So, Stuart, could you introduce yourself to the Sports Psych Show audience?
Yeah, so I'm a senior rugby coach, is my job title at Leinster Rugby in Ireland, Dublin, Ireland. And I've done that job for 3.5 years now. And then prior to that, I worked for the Rugby Football Union in England, where I was head of elite player development for 4 years, and I was the England head coach for 4 years after that.
Well, there's been a Sports Psych Show. I'd like to start there, and as we've discussed off-air, we don't know where this is going to go. I'm sure we'll talk about leadership and player management, etc., etc. But let's start with sports psychology. I know that throughout your career, I believe you've used sports psychologists. I know you worked alongside Bill Beswick when he worked with you at England Rugby. Is this an area of the game that you feel is emerging? Do you think it has emerged and it's there now? What's your take on the landscape with sports psychology?
I think, going back, I guess in my own personal background, I did a sports science degree, and I ended up doing electives in psychology, physiology, biomechanics. And my dissertation was on the psychological, physiological and biomechanical rehabilitation of an athlete who had an ACL injury. So going right the way back to my early 20s, I guess I've always had an interest in it. I went from that degree to a teaching degree, and obviously I wasn't practicing sports psychology or learning about sports psychology necessarily as a teacher, but I guess actually I was. I was pretty much working with kids from the ages of 11 to 16 and using techniques to motivate and develop resilience and cohesion and confidence and all those things that I guess a psychologist would do. So I would have always had an interest in the psychological side of performance. In terms of my connection with specific psychologists, I'm very lucky to have come across many people like yourself who've certainly helped shape my philosophy and my understanding of sports psychology in a deeper level. But in terms of hands-on people, when I was at the RFU, there was a guy called Matt Toms who's excellent. He worked across the age grade teams, and he did a brilliant job in terms of developing player understanding, self-awareness, emotional intelligence. All the players who are in the England team now, actually, probably in some way, shape, or form, will benefit from Matt. Bill Beswick, as you say, he would be. If you say who is the greatest influences on you as a coach, Bill would be one of three people who really I could say, he actively shaped my philosophy, and his mindset and his attitude towards a performance certainly had a big impact on me. And as I say, he worked with me through England, my time with England as England coach. At Leinster, we don't have a practicing hands-on sports psychologist. I think a lot of the coaching that I do, I would say, integrates a lot of psychology anyway. And we do have someone who comes from the outside in to help with the senior playing group occasionally, 2 or 3 times a year. He'll do work on the values piece and controlling your emotions. So, but he's not full-time in the environment. So I think I've had various degrees of involvement with different sports psychologists and sports psychology. Where I think it is at the moment, I think it's important, very important. I think the more I think about it, the more it can be embedded within the coaching team, the better.
Yeah.
I've seen rugby teams bring a psychologist in and speak to the players, and then suddenly, the players, it doesn't quite connect, it doesn't quite fit, and it doesn't quite fit with the coaches. I think it works best really where the psychologist is very much in the background working through the coaches, supporting the coaches, and available for the players as well. So I think that's where it is at the moment. If I was a betting man in terms of my sport anyway, and then where do I think it'll go? I think particularly with young players and some of the mental health challenges that are surrounding the sport at the moment, and also those players who are coming to the end of their careers. I think there's a real growing need for support for players in both those areas. Young players who are finding the way and perhaps reading more about their profiles on social media than they are concentrating on being coached, and then those players come to the end of their careers. I think both areas are growth areas for psychology.
I'm just working backwards to what you said there about coaches integrating this into their process. I think the most impactful psychologists, and I know coaches aren't sports psychologists per se, but they really are in a position to be the most impactful, most powerful psychologists, because they're on the grass, they've got boots, they've got the feet on the ground, they're interacting with players all the time. So I completely agree. One thing I found working in, say, team invasion sports like rugby, like football, I work very heavily in football, is that coaches are so socialised into the tactical side of the game, strategical side, the technical side of the game, that I think sometimes, and I had this as a golf coach, you're so socialised into working on somebody's technique. You're so socialised into those sides that you constantly look for solutions there, rather than looking for solutions from the mental aspect, the mental side of the game. Not so much a question, but I'd just like to get your comment on that. I just think as coaches, we're so socialised into the tech-tac piece that sometimes we just forget about that mental piece.
Yeah, I've seen some coaches like that. I'd like to think, if you came and watched a week of me coaching, you wouldn't come away with that impression. I very much see, when I was involved in player development, you'd see loads of players coming through. You'd always wonder and try and assess whether they had a chance of really making it through to the very top. And my simple way of analysing that was to say, are they strong physically, and have they got the physical components to be successful in the sport? Are they strong technically and tactically, and are they strong mentally? In all the areas that could encompass, such as mental toughness, resilience, competitiveness, or whatever it is. And I often coach many players who were very, very good in two of those three areas. So they might be very gifted physically, they might be great technically and tactically, but mentally they haven't quite got the all the pieces in place, or vice versa. You've got very good mental athlete, very good technically, tactically, but physically they don't have, the requisite power, speed, for the modern game of international rugby. And I guess my point is, when I'm coaching in any given week, it's all three areas interwoven in any particular week that I would try and develop. So I would try and develop the skills technically and tactically within a coaching week. I'd try and develop them physically, so we wouldn't need separate conditioning sessions. Obviously, we'd have separate weight sessions, but a lot of the rugby conditioning is done within the rugby session. Not it's not secondary. With a conditioner taking them to do laps of the field or whatever.
Sure.
And then the mental side of it, or the leadership side, and the motivational side, and all those things that come in under sports psychology. I would cover a lot of as well within the team meetings, the conversation you'd have with players, etc., etc. So I think that's what good coaching should look like, personally, where all three areas are covered. And where I've seen it struggle is probably the cases that you described, where the coach is either, obsessed with just technical and tactical, and doesn't really understand how to develop players mentally or physically within training sessions.
You've been a player developer, you've been a head coach, you've been a head coach at the very, very highest level. What is it that players do mentally that helps them reach that grade? What is it that players fail on mentally that prevents them from reaching that grade, even if they've got the physical prerequisite?
I think this is the Bill Besic one. I think Bill would talk about fighter or victim. Prerequisite for those players who get to the top, they have a fighter mentality. So they don't get put off by setbacks. there's a great adage, isn't it? The rocky road in player development. The players who've gone on to make it to the very top have often gone through a rocky road, and that could be things that are outside of their sport. It could be something happened in the family situation, or they didn't get selected for something, or they had to move house, at a key time in their life, and it's the players that have gone through this rocky road and have the resilience and the fighting mentality to stay competitive during those times that actually make them the player they become. So the players, I'm thinking about players like Owen Farrell and the lads who've come through England now who I was coaching when they were 18, 19. They'd be maybe not that self-aware when they're 18, 19, but we worked hard to develop their self-awareness. They would have inner confidence, they'd have inner drive, they would have good communication skills, they'd have leadership qualities that could be developed. They had a point of view, they had good communication skills, they could deal with pressure, they wanted the ball when the game was on the line, they wouldn't be knocked off course by failure, they would learn from it and put it to one side and move on. They would relish the challenge of high-level competition and tough training. So I guess, there's some examples. I mean, there's hundreds more. But and the opposite is true of the players that don't quite make it. They really deep down, do they love the sport? Do they love the competition? Are they self-aware? Do they possess leadership qualities? Are they a good communicator? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, I mean, that's one of the prerequisites to be an international player is you have to have strong mental qualities. Otherwise, to stand in the tunnel before an England international against, New Zealand, South Africa, Twickenham, and you're waiting to go out in front of 80,000 people to put your body on the line with, how many people watching on TV, millions. You have to have mental toughness to want to do that. And you have to have mental toughness to deal with the consequences that win, lose, or draw.
I'm going to come back to that term mental toughness. I just want to go back to fighter or victim, which I suppose could be related. But it feels to me when you're fighter or victim could be related to off the pitch, everyday life, as well as on the pitch. How much do you feel it's incumbent on a coach to make a difference with regard being a fighter or being a victim? How much influence do you think that you have as a coach?
I think you do. I think that's what good coaching is. Good coaching is shaping mindset, it's shaping behaviour, it's raising awareness. Let's say a player has not been picked for a particular game, and they're feeling sorry for themselves. They've not put the right level of effort into the next training session. They're maybe having a few corridor conversations about why they've not been picked. Why me, poor me, type of stuff. And there's always ways in which you can feed back behaviourally to players about how they've come across and making them aware of their behaviours, so that we all make mistakes and we all feel sorry for ourselves sometimes. But ultimately, it's not a strategy that's going to get you picked again, basically. You try and give them tools and strategies to help them overcome that next time around. I think if you go along the mindset that mental skills can't be learned, you either have them or you don't, then I think you're doing the players a disservice. In fact, I did a level 5 coaching course when I was 32, and one of the assignments I had to do was a psychological one, and I chose 18-year-old academy athlete, and we did a psychological case study on him. He was an X-Factor athlete, an unbelievable technical and tactical ability, but was a little bit inconsistent in his commitment, his communication, etc., etc. And I actually reread it not too long ago, and the final paragraph I put was, if we turn around at the end of the day and say this guy will never make it, then he never will make it. It's incumbent on us as coaches to help develop the players and see it as a skill that can be developed equally in the same way that you can get physically stronger or you can get technically better.
I think that's a really interesting notion, because I just wonder if our beliefs as coaches influence how we portray ourselves as coaches. If we don't believe that a player can make it, or we don't believe that a player is going to make a certain impact in the next game, do we betray these thoughts? Do we come across through our body language, through our communication, in a manner that actually demonstrates that?
Yeah, I think one of the challenges in the way that coach development is evolving is the current crop of coaches are often former players who've been at the very top and by the very nature had all those qualities. So they don't understand why a young player or someone who you're coaching wouldn't be mentally tough or resilient or whatever. But when you've come through the pathway that I came through, I was never a top end player. I was a teacher, academy coach. You learn to help develop players, and I think, one of the risks at the moment is that we have coaches who don't see it as a skill that can be developed. It's the same with leadership. I think people often say, "Oh, well, leaders are born or made." I'm going, well, yeah, of course, some leaders are born, but equally we can improve leadership if we treat it as a skill that can be learned. And we have tools to help them learn it. The same is true with the mental side of the game, in my opinion. But as I say, some of the coaches now would not really have either studied it, understood it, because it always came naturally to them.
Yeah, and I think just returning to that fighter or victim, the mental toughness piece, for me, a lot of that can be delivered through your coaching sessions within your tasks. So if we're creating tough to achieve tasks, if we're creating dynamic activities, then we can actually coach the fighter mentality, can't we? We can actually coach that mental toughness piece.
I think it's essential. If you were to come and watch, a training session at Leinster, it is mentally, physically and technically challenging. And it stretches the players sometimes to a point that it's harder than the game. Not in a physical sense, in that we're doing contact, obviously, but there's certainly Tuesday sessions that we do. I'm trying to develop their mental resilience on a Tuesday so that it stands them in good stead, so it becomes instinct on a Saturday. And I firmly believe that coaching can shape it for definite. And you've got role models there who can role model what great behaviour looks like. And if we're very lucky at Leinster, you've got a fantastic set of senior players who are all, top end internationals who've all been there and seen it and done it. And they often role model behaviours for the young players. And the young players then pick those traits up, and then they become the role models for the next generation. And so it should continue. Where it falls short sometimes is where the coach sets the challenge too hard, and there's consistent failure, or there isn't enough challenge, and there's no challenge, and there's no escalation, and then as a consequence, you don't get that mental growth that you need. So, I spent a lot of time thinking about on a Monday, for example, what session are we going to do on a Tuesday? What are the parameters of the games I'm going to play? How hard will I make it? Do I feel going into this game we need to be have a boost of injection of confidence, in which case I'll make it so they get more success than failure, or maybe we've just won a game, we're playing against a team that we perceived we could beat. I'll flip it round and make it challenging, so we have maybe a little bit more failure. As a consequence, I'm constantly trying to shape the mindset of the playing group in a sweet spot between confidence and anxiety, and somewhere in between the two. And how I message how the opposition are preparing, what type of skill set the opposition have got, how I'm conducting the training session. It is all sports psychology.
And do you get, when you're sitting down on a Monday to write your activities, when you're pondering that balance between stretch and support, that balance between confidence and anxiety, do you get much player feedback? Do you look to ask players how they feel, how they perceive the week ahead? or do you do that from your own sort of playbook and within the coaching staff?
I think there's a lot of instinct, and instinct is usually shaped by experience. So, going back to teaching, so you've taught 5 lessons a day, 5 days a week for 40 weeks of the year. At 21 years old, you do that for 8, 9, 10 years, and then now I'm 50 years old, so that's 30 years of experience. Experience typically can help guide you, definitely at the start of a week, about the mindset of the group. But equally, when you do your morning review, you often can gauge the mentality of the group, the feedback, by the feedback they give you, how they felt the opposition were that they played against, how the opposition they're going to play against this week, will be set up. So you can often get feedback from the players, and I think it's a combination of the two. It's player feedback, gathered in a subtle way, instinct about how I know if we've got a European Cup quarter-final, which we were due to play against Saracens next week, I'm not having to work on the psychology of the group in terms of getting them motivated. It's more getting the emotion right and the technical detail right for a game of that size. If it's a team that we perceive we could beat, then I say that's different. And so you can usually predict, but one of the strengths of Leinster is there's a consistency of an emotional preparation that the players will put in. And we really, really do value the quality of the training sessions, the quality of the practice to shape our mindset to go into the game, rather than have a big emotional rev up at the end of the week to try and beat opposition. We trust that our performance will be dictated by the quality of our training and our desire to want to achieve perfection in training, and the players leave no stone unturned in their preparation, regardless of who's get picked, which then helps us deliver performance at the weekend.
So my perception of that is there's intense training sessions within a constantly regulated emotional temperature of the organisation.
Yeah. I think there's that. There's elements of repetition, which give us the consistency of technical skill. There's elements of movement repetition, which gives us the movement patterns that are, we need to deliver on instinct on a weekend. There's a physical challenge. Rest periods would be low. There'd be corrections shot out from me during the session, but I wouldn't stop the session to correct. There'd be an expectation that technical development would be done outside of that session, so that I'm not stopping the session consistently and allowing the intensity to drop. We train with high intensity. And the reason we do that is because we want that to be replicated in the game at weekend.
I was going to ask you, actually, because the non-directive style of coaching has become and is becoming more fashionable. And it seems in direct contrast to the notion of training with maximum or 100% intensity. Do you find that quite challenging? Do you find it quite challenging when you see something going wrong and you perhaps want to stop and you want to ask questions, but you know that you want them to play with intensity? Is that a bit of an internal wrestle that you can have there as a coach?
No, because you talk about it as a trend in coaching, and I agree with you, but I've never personally subscribed to that trend. I'm not saying I don't ask questions and I don't stop to get feedback, but if there's a continuum of directive coaching at one end of the spectrum where you are, the sergeant major, autocratic, no feedback, you do as I say, and then the other end you've got this empowering approach that has lots of questioning, lots of chance for reflection, lots of chance for debate, ask the players what they think all the time. I sit in the middle, and I flex between the two. So I never really have that conflict in my mind when I go into a training session, because I know that we're going to train fast and hard and tough, and we can have the debate afterwards. And the players are used to that. Now, when I came to Leinster, they probably weren't used to that style, and it took them a few sessions and a few shocks to adapt. But Yeah, I think, it's the same in terms of, there's the same debate in terms of, in rugby particularly, in terms of technical coaching versus a sort of games-based approach. So you've got this again spectrum of, at one end you've got this very much games-based approach where we will learn the game by playing the game in a very unstructured way. We can pass the ball in different directions. We learn to explore space and etc. etc. And then the other end, you've got this very structured style of coaching, which is, we're going to do set piece, we're going to do scrums and lineouts, we're going to run our starter plays, and we're going to become like robots. And again, I sit in the middle. But there's been a trend in rugby over the last few years that's taken it really down this games-based approach without much technical detail, more on exploring space, which I think is fine to a point, but I don't believe it's the answer that will deliver you success at the highest level. And I'm talking, obviously with my England hat on, but now with my Leinster hat on, where we played 19, won 19 this season, and we've won all 6 games in Europe. We're in the quarter-final, and when that quarter-final gets played, who knows? But that will be the approach that I would have.
Did you come from either direction there, Stuart? If I was to go back a decade and I was watching you on a training pitch, would you be more towards the directive or non-directive side, or have you always naturally and easily fitted into that middle space?
Yeah, no, I think I have. But again, I'll take you back to 1992, and I'm doing a teacher training degree, and I'm taught about the Mostrom spectrum of teaching styles. So I'm educated on those styles of coaching. I remember doing reciprocal teaching in athletics, and I had cue cards where we were teaching the students or the pupils were teaching each other how to start a 100 meters race, and we would go through that, or the long jump, or a basketball layup. So you've got that reciprocal teaching where actually the pupils are teaching each other versus this directive style. So that was, you learn the theory of it. Then I had an analysis of my coaching done in it must have been 2006, and I basically was asked to assess myself, how I thought I was in terms of the 6 styles of coaching. So one bit, and I'm going to test me now if I can remember all 6, but one was coaching. So you are giving them technical knowledge. Second was pace setting, which is, right, I'm going to get up first thing in the morning, I'm going to drive you relentlessly during the day, I'm going to be first on the training field, I'm going to, and this is, leadership style as well, obviously. Yeah. Democratic, where we're asking decisions. Affiliative, where we're creating close emotional bonds, etc. So the 6 styles. Yep. And I basically gave my analysis of how I thought I came across, and then I got 5 senior players, some staff to do the same, and then it was fascinating to see that I was thinking, well, I don't think I'm that pace setting really, and they were going, Jesus, I think you are. And obviously it's not like you there's a right or wrong way. It's like someone described to me, it's getting the right golf club out the bag at the right time to hit the right shot. So sometimes you're pace setting, sometimes you're coaching, sometimes you're affiliative, sometimes you're democratic. Again, I guess the point I'm making is that I was educated in that way, which then allowed me to have the theory behind the practice, and which then shaped my philosophy on coaching. So, yeah, a long way to answer the question is, I think if you came and watched me coaching Leeds Tykes Academy in 2000 2005, and you speak to other players who were coached then, who all went on to play and still are playing, I'll talk about people like Danny Kerr and Jordan Crane and Tom Biggs and players like that, who Rob Webber, who's just finishing now. These lads come to the end of their careers, they'd say, yep, that's pretty much what training was like.
If I was to watch you coach, I'd get a certain impression, and you're giving me that impression now. If I was to climb inside your thoughts, your feelings, your experiences, what would I experience? Are you conscious of what you're talking about now when you're coaching? Are you aware of being directive, being non-directive? Or is it a little bit more automatic? Are you seeing and doing, or are you seeing, thinking and doing?
A bit of both, I'd say. Instinct, there's certain moments as a coach, I think you just react. And, the good coaches react in the right way at the right time, I think. Maybe a less experienced coach, you might, when you should be giving them a kick up the backside, you're putting their arm around the shoulder, or vice versa. Or sometimes you have a crack at a player in a session, say, listen, you're not working hard enough. You operate on instinct there. But there are other times in the formation of sessions or in a lead up to a meeting, the tone, the intonation, the clips I show, the type of psychological mindset I'm trying to develop. There's clearly thought gone into that before I actually do it. So I think a lot about what I'm going to say and how I'm going to say it. But there are times as a coach where you have to operate on instinct, and the great coaches don't get it right all the time, but you hit a high percentage. And the players will always forgive you for a mistake if you hit a high percentage. But I've worked with other coaches who just seem to say the wrong thing at the wrong time. And eventually it wears you down as a player, and you begin to lose confidence in the coach, and credibility. His credibility drops, or their credibility drops in your eyes. And then once you get into that sort of position as a coach, you're in trouble, because it's very hard to regain credit when you've lost it. But yeah, again, experience. I can't. I've mentioned it 3 or 4 times now. I can't express enough the importance of, it's Monday morning, it's badminton, you've got 50 minutes with year 9 and you're coaching them the overhead clear, and you set a session, you do the session, you plan, you review the session, and then 5 minutes later another group comes in and they've got football, and then another group comes in and they've got hockey, another group they've got basketball. So you do this 5 times a day, plan, do, review, plan, do, review. You get in your car, you drive home, you reflect on your session, and it's almost like the 10,000 hour thing. The more you do it, the more experienced you become, the more you begin to read the cues, the more your instincts begin to get improved. So, I think if you're saying to me what helps develop a good coach, it's coaching. Coach. You have to go out there and you have to coach, and you've got to learn by coaching. And I was lucky that I've had lots of coaching hours at every level of the game. My son's team, when they were under 60s, I was coaching them as I was coaching England. So, it's across the board.
It reminds me, Stuart, I always say to people, my best experience, or most profound experiences in my training to be a sports psychologist wasn't necessarily my master's degree in sports psychology. It really was the thousands of hours I did as a golf coach. Because as you're mentioning there, when you were a PE teacher, and you're going from one sport to the next sport and do review, as a golf coach, yes, you plan to do review, but also you're for half an hour you've got the lawyer, and then you've got the housewife, and then you've got somebody who's over 70, then you've got a whole bunch of 6-year-olds. So from a psychosocial perspective, you really get an array of social experiences and challenges being thrown at you. So that
and you learn to differentiate, and you learn to adapt, and you learn to use different styles. So go back to the golf club analogy, right club out the bag at the right time.
Lending from my golf experience, I always used to say to myself when I was coaching, watch the person, watch the player, watch the swing, don't watch the ball, because it's so easy to watch the ball and really it's what the golf swing is doing to impact the ball. What are you looking at when you coach?
I'm looking for cohesion. I'm looking for movement patterns. So I would coach attack and defence at Leinster. I would be very much broad picture. So I'm looking at the overall shape of our defence, the shape of our attack, the movement, the flow within a session. I'm looking for individual areas within that, but where I guess the opposite end of the spectrum to me is the line-up throwing coach who's looking at the technique of the ball leaving the hooker's hands, or the goal-kicking coach who's responsible for the goal kickers and the technique. A bit like your golf swing. That's why Dave Allred would be outstanding as a rugby coach, because of his ability to see that technical detail. But I'm looking at a bigger picture stuff. I'm looking at the flow of the team and the intensity that we're creating, and whether we're looking cohesive, because we have an ever-changing team, and I'm constantly looking to develop cohesion with the playing group that gets selected for this particular week, because at Leinster we've got 17 players who often go away for Ireland camp. As a consequence, it's an ever-changing team, so I'm looking to create that cohesion in the session.
I think that's really, really interesting, and I hadn't really considered it like that, because when I have worked in rugby, again, being a technician, having been a golf coach and looking at the fine detail, it always fascinated me the hooker throwing in the ball at the line out, and the technical side of that as an example from the game of rugby, and how that would grip me, and how I would have a narrow lens there. And the way I've interpreted what you've said is that you see, in many respects, your job as encompassing your job is to have a wide lens. Do you think coaches can build the capacity to have a wide lens and a narrow lens, to go from wide to narrow, narrow to wide? Do you think that that's a skill? Do you think that's possible to achieve?
Yeah, I get just to sort of probably add to that. I mean, obviously I'm coaching in professional environments, so I do have coaches, who are looking at different aspects of the session within the session. It's not just me on my own. We've got a contact skills coach, Felipe Contaboma's out there looking at backs, lines of running, Robin McBride, the line out, Leo's there looking at the breakdown. We're all co-coaching together. But if you're in that Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, coaching situation, and there's you and one other, it is difficult to do both. There's no doubt about it. The way I would approach it, if that was the case, is that I would look at the wide lens during the session. Clearly, I don't care what level I was coaching, I would want to try and enable the session to be videoed from both the wide and the narrow lens, so to speak. I would always be able to go back at the technical detail and look at that. And I would want to feedback to the players on the narrow lens piece. But also, there are lots of other opportunities to coach the narrow lens stuff. So, let's talk passing technique, for example. So I would expect the players to come into one of my sessions with technique of passing to be excellent. But I don't just expect them to do it without me coaching them how to do it. But I don't do it within that session. So we've got a gym with a bit of small space in. And when the boys are doing weights, they will then come to me for a skill block of 3 minutes. And I'll get a slow motion camera and I will get them passing in threes, in waves or whatever. I would have coached them technique. I'd gone through the technique. I would show them the slow motion footage. And we'd work on our technique in the smaller, more controlled environment within the gym. It's not raining. It's keeping their skill development up. So I would still do that within a working week. So that, I don't want to give you the impression that I don't do detail. I do detail within the coaching, but it's outside of that particular session. In that session, I'm looking at the bigger picture stuff, whilst the other coaches and myself, are addressing some of the technical things that we think are really important in the lead up to that game. For example, the breakdown, for example.
It reminds me how important that term co-coaching is, and from what you're saying, it feels like in any planning, considering co-coaching, the art of co-coaching, considering each other's objectives, what we're trying to get out of the session, seems to me to be quite an important thing.
Yeah, I think to be honest, before you even get to that point, it's clarity on roles and responsibilities before the players even turn up. And I think that's one thing that, when Leo asked me to come to Leinster, my first question to him was, what am I responsible for? And what is the backs coach responsible for? And what is the forwards coach responsible for? And what are you responsible for? Because unless you've got clarity on those roles and responsibilities, it's very easy then to get lost as coaches with each other, which the players can pick up on like a shot. So clarity on roles and responsibility is key. And then once you've got that, and you realise that, right, we've got all the bases covered here, but you're covering that base and I'm covering this base, then you can really sort of really grow your co-coaching expertise and mindset within your coaching team.
You asked the head coach, the leader of the organisation, what your role was, what the responsibilities within your role, what he wanted you to do, essentially. That sounds like great followership. And I know that great followership is important in leadership practices. What to you is a great leader? What is it to be a leader? How does one become good at leadership?
It was an interesting situation arriving at Leinster, because obviously I'd come from coaching England, and Leo was younger than me, yet he was effectively the head coach, and I was coming in as a senior coach. I think the best way you could describe it is he'd be the director of rugby and I'd be the head coach. But the job titles weren't given out that way, which is, I wasn't bothered anyway, to be honest. So I think we have a great working relationship, and we both effectively and all our coaching team try to show good leadership in different ways, and we share the leadership workload. I think for me, a leader as opposed to a manager, obviously clearly leaders have to make decisions. So Leo would have the final say on selection, as I did with England, and he'd be the guy that would talk about the wide lens and then our lens. We need to look at the detail, but also need to look at the bigger picture. But for me, the real essence of leadership is creating a vision for people to follow, and you want to create and paint that in vivid detail so that they will willingly follow you, not because they're paid to, but because they feel inspired by you. And if you can build your leadership credibility on what I think are 4 tenets: one is your honesty, being honest; 2 is your technical detail, so you know what you're talking about; 3 is doing what you say you will do, and making sure you have that consistency; and then 4 is you are forward thinking and planning, so you're always looking into the future. I think you won't go far wrong, but I emphasize the point is that this isn't a skill that are bestowed on a small number of people. This is a skill that can be learnt. And we spoke beforehand. A lot of the stuff I put on LinkedIn is just leadership content of things I've learnt. I've studied leadership since I went on that level 5 course. I guess instinctively I've always ended up gravitating to leadership positions, but never understood the theory behind it. But once I got that explained to me, then I really opened the doors to meet other great leaders, to read about other great leaders, to study leadership. And now, I guess, having done that for 20 years, I feel that I should share what I've learned. And people keep saying, "Why do you keep giving away for free?" I'm like, well, why not? I want people to help people get better and learn to be a better leader.
From all the study you've done, where have been your main growth points, Stuart? If I was to watch you lead a decade ago and watch you lead now, what would be different? What would be better? What specific behaviours would you engage in now that you would say, "Yep, I'm a better leader"?
Well, the obvious one is going from being 30 years old to being a PE teacher to 41 years old coaching England. So, if you imagine your leadership journey as a graph, there's a pretty steep rise there in 10 years. And then an even steeper one in the next 4 years coaching England. And then, I didn't work full-time until I joined Leinster in 2016, so maybe there was a plateau. And then a time for growth again, and a new leadership challenge at Leinster, and the graph goes up. So I think when you talk to people who study, the experts in leadership, they say that there is this sort of growth and plateau stage in any leadership journey. It's making sure that when you're in those plateau phases that you don't plateau downwards, so to speak. You don't end up going backwards. You use the quiet time. I guess this, with the virus and everything that's going on, searching for positives, could be tremendous growth time for people who maybe have more time on their hands than normal, and you can really study leadership within these windows, read books, and maybe study things you wouldn't have been able to do because of the busyness of life. And I think they clearly I've developed as a leader, and coaching the national team would have had a big bearing on that. I think again, if you go back to the academy lads in 2001, and we are 2020. I'd like to think they would go, it's not too different, but clearly events shape your personality and your leadership style and your mindset. And being the coach of a national team, winning big games, losing your job in the way that it happened has an effect.
Last couple of questions, Stuart, because I'm conscious of your time. Do you think there's a real feel of self-awareness here in terms of building your leadership? To be able to improve your leadership, you need to be aware of what you're doing now. Do you think that 360 feedback, brutal, honest feedback, is important for coaches, is important for leaders?
Yeah, I do. It doesn't have to be brutal, by the way. I think one of the things that was done quite early with me was the psychometric profile of my personality, and there's loads out there, but that definitely helped me raise awareness of my own personality and why I was the way I was and where my strengths and weaknesses were. So that was the start point, that psychometric profile, and then various different ways of gathering feedback has been invaluable, really. You have to be broad enough shoulders to accept the feedback, but also I think in amongst all the psychometric and the 360, there's also a time for reflection as well, where you just sit and think about, why did I do that? Did that meeting go well? Could I have presented that better? How did that coaching session go? So I'd be quite good at creating those windows, time for reflection, really. And I think that's definitely helps a leader grow. I mean, I joined the RFU in 2007, living in Leeds, so I did a lot of time on the road, in the car, either listening to podcasts, listening to leadership books or audio books, or just thinking, to be honest. And since then, I've been in Dublin, family still in Leeds, commuting back and forwards. I live in a one-bedroom flat in Dublin on my own when I'm coaching in Leinster, and I sit and think a lot as well. But yeah, feedback is crucial as well.
My final question: if we had a magic time machine, if there was such a thing, and you could get in that time machine and go back to any time, any place during your coaching career, what one coaching process would you change, or what one coaching behaviour would you add in that you think would have made a profound difference to performance or outcome of your teams?
How many times can I go back in time?
I know I would like to go back numerous times in my. Well,
I remember that time when I was teaching back in whenever, and then there was the session I did with the academy that I didn't go as well as I wanted, and then when I was coaching Leeds in the Premiership, when we were losing all the time, I remember I took a bit too much on myself. I remember coaching England in certain games, and I thought it was great, and other times I thought maybe I could have handled certain things better. So there's so many different ones, I guess, whizzing through my mind when you ask the question. I guess probably the answer, in a broad sense, is that if I was to divide my time up again with England, and we've talked for nearly an hour about coaching, and you probably, hopefully, I've come across in a way that you think this guy loves coaching, and genuinely I do. I love coaching, I love teaching. I'd be happy to go back as a teacher. I like talking about leadership. But when I was doing the England job, I would say the proportion of time spent managing was higher than leadership and coaching, because it was such a big thing to do. There's so many moving parts to the job. We lost a game we should have won, and it cost, obviously, not just me, but the coaches who worked with me and many others in the pathway in the RFU changed on the back of my departure. I would have coached more, coaching England, and delegated some of the managerial stuff. It was really important and needed doing, and I can do the managerial stuff. I'm quite good on detail, so I was happy to do that. And to be honest, I enjoyed part of a lot of it, the connection of the international age grade teams to the senior team, trying to connect the team to grassroots rugby, and trying to pull the RFU into a really strong cultural environment, which wasn't really the case when I took the job in 2011. There was no CEO, there was no chairman, etc., etc. So I don't regret it, if you like. And, I think it was circumstances, but when I finished the job, I was very lucky to create a relationship with a guy called Jim Collins, who wrote a book called Good to Great. He'd followed my progress, and he connected with me after I lost the job, and he said, "There's always another mountain to climb, and let me know if you want to chat." So anyway, we had a chat, and he said, "Listen, Stuart, I mentored Steve Jobs before he when he was at Apple." He said he got sacked, and 12 years later he went back and he created the company that it became. And I remember saying to him, what did he do? And he said, "Well, I'll tell you what he did. After he got sacked the first time, he went away and he spent time on his own, and he thought about what is his passion, and he followed his passion. And his passion was creating products and all the things that Apple are great at. And he came back and did that. And I very much did the same thing. I went away. I thought a lot about what do I enjoy? What do I when I get out of bed in the morning, what I really want to do, and I just love getting out of bed and coaching. And that window between leaving England and coaching Leinster clarified that in my mind. So as a consequence, when the Leinster job came up, it was just the perfect fit.
Had you finished, or do you want to carry on? Well, that's an absolutely fascinating story, and I've read Good to Great, and it's a fantastic book. And Stuart, I know that in terms of resources, you are distributing fantastic resources on platforms like LinkedIn. Is that the best way for people to engage in your Leadership Academy, in the coaching material you're sending out into the world?
Yeah, there's that, but there's also a leadership course on Udemy, Udemy. So if you just Google Udemy, it's a forum where people can put, if you want to learn to be a better cook, then go on Udemy. But if you want to be a better leader, just Google leadership or Google my name on Udemy. And there's a course on there which I created a couple of years ago, actually. But the content is still hopefully relevant now. It is relevant now. And it's got something like 3,500 people signed up from all over the world, which is fantastic. It's cheap, to be honest. They offer really good discounts. So, if you're paying 10 or 20 quid for the whole course, then that's how much it costs. So I'm not going to become an internet millionaire, but it's definitely some content on there that might be of interest.
No, that's brilliant. I think I'll sign myself up for that. Well, look, Stuart, it's been a delight, an honour, and a pleasure. Thank you so much for sharing your work and your thoughts with the Sports Psych Show audience. No
problem. And I'd just like to say, if people are interested in the content on LinkedIn, just drop me a connection and then you can get access to it also. But nice to chat. I hope it was of interest.
Thank you very much, Stuart. Well, everyone, I really enjoyed that podcast, and I'd love to hear what you, the listener, thinks. So please do get in touch via Twitter or Facebook or through my website, danabrahams.com, to tell me what you think of the Sports Psych Show. And if you do have any suggestions, I'd be delighted to hear them. I'm already looking forward to next week's episode. Bye for now.